Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Teaming During an Epidemic, How to Keep Remote Teams Motivated, Engaged, and Focused. This program is brought to you by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. And I also want to mention that this series of programs has been funded by Duke Energy. My name is Melanie Herman. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, and it's my pleasure to be the presenter for today's program. Just a little bit about the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. The center is a national organization that was created to inspire effective risk management in nonprofit organizations. Our ultimate goal is to help leadership teams of nonprofits take mission advancing risks. So many people think that we're an organization that tells people to be risk averse or to clamp down on risk taking, but actually the opposite is true. We really think that nonprofits have to take a lot of risks to achieve their missions. So for today's session, we're going to cover 3 topics, and you can see those on the slide. I want to encourage you, if you have questions, to use the chat feature to send me those questions. Because we have so many people registered today and participating live, it's unlikely I'll be able to answer a lot of questions. I'm not sure if we'll even get to any of them, but what we will do is download the chat, and I will answer all of those questions as a follow-up to the webinar. I'll answer those one-on-one. If you send us a chat message, we'll know who you are, know how to reach you because of your registration. So please feel free to ask any questions that come to mind, and feel free to do that via the chat feature. Or of course, you're always welcome to contact me at any time after the program. So the 3 topics we're going to cover. We're going to start with what is teaming. Some of you may be curious as to why I use that word in the title instead of teams. We're going to talk about building trust and connection with our teams. And then I'm going to share some tips and takeaways for motivating, engaging, and helping your teams focus while so many of us are working remotely, more so than usual because of COVID-19. All right, let's start with what is teaming. So last year I had a chance to read a terrific book. It's called Teaming by Professor Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School. And I learned a lot from reading this book, really inspired by much of what she had to say. One of the things that many people that are new to telework are discovering during the current epidemic is how much they miss interacting with their colleagues and coworkers, and how much they really enjoy that interaction, and they're missing it now that we're working remotely. So in this book titled Teaming, Professor Edmondson explains that even though conflict between humans in the workplace is inevitable, the pluses of working together to solve problems really outweigh the minuses. So if you've ever complained about a team that you're on, or complained about staff meetings, or complained about the office environment, you may be regretting those complaints now because you miss that constant interaction that we're used to when we're going to an office every day. So when I first picked up the book, I wondered if the word teaming was really the same thing as teams, whether the 2 words had the same meaning. And so that was something I was curious about. And early on in reading this book, I discovered that really they mean 2 different things, or Professor Edmondson uses them in different ways. When she uses the word teams, she's referring to those kind of traditional structures, those groups that come together that we're all familiar with and that we've always been a part of in nonprofit organizations. She's talking about groups that have a formal structure. So certain people are appointed to a team, they volunteer for a team, teams have a certain size. And teams, traditional teams also have a cadence, right? So if you think about your staff meetings, if you think about management team that you may be serving on, if you think about a board of directors or a board committee, these are teams that have a prescribed set of meetings, or they meet 4 times a year, or 6 times a year, or every month, or every week. So that's kind of the traditional team. There's structure and there's a cadence. But when Professor Edmondson talks about teaming, she's really talking about teamwork on the fly. And she uses terms like spontaneous and purposeful and low burden and quick wins to describe how people come together in organizations to solve problems. And I think that the theory behind the book, or certainly one of the goals of her book, is to show us that teaming, those spontaneous get-togethers, those instances where we bring people from different backgrounds and different interests together to solve problems, is just as important as having structured teams in an organization. And I just think that's so true in the nonprofit sector. It has so much value. So one of the insights from teaming is that, although teaming could be enjoyable and invigorating, sometimes it's dreary. And I think sometimes it becomes dreary because there are common frustrations when we work with others in an organization. So one frustration I hear about all the time is accountability. And I'm sure each of you has been on a team where you felt that some members were super accountable, right? And accountability means doing what you promised you would do, living up to your commitments, or you felt that certain people were very accountable and did exactly what they promised to do, and others were not. Others were slackers. And so it becomes frustrating when you're on a team that's kind of uneven, where you have some members who are accountable and others who aren't. It also becomes frustrating sometimes when you're serving on a team where there are lopsided responsibilities, where certain people have far more responsibility and burden than others, where the responsibility and the work is not shared evenly. So that's another common frustration. And then a third frustration is being on a team where you feel like you're not being understood, or you have a hard time understanding others, right? It's hard to understand others. So all of these things lead to frustrations when we work together as teams, or when we engage in even spontaneous teaming. All right, so a couple of additional insights from teaming before we move on. Many people in the workplace act as if they'd prefer to be left alone, right? And I'm sure you've worked with people like that. You may be someone like that who feels that you're more productive when you're working alone. But the research on the topic of teams suggests that nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, individuals who work well together in a team, or who engage in that spontaneous teaming, are more productive than those that try to go it alone. So it's really interesting that the research backs up the idea that we really need to team more effectively in our nonprofit workplaces. And another finding from the research that I found really interesting is that learning and growth happen more efficiently when we engage in teaming. And the research on learning suggests that if you were to ask all the employees in your nonprofit organization, about their number one goal, what they hope to achieve, what they want to get out of the job, no matter what the job is, most people will tell you that learning is an important goal. And when we look at data from exit interviews, we also find that many people leave nonprofit organizations because they felt that they were no longer learning and they became bored. So by supporting and encouraging spontaneous teaming, and again, the more traditional structured teams, you're providing your staff with the opportunity to learn on the job and to ultimately be more content in the workplace. So there's also a dark side of teaming. And in the book, Professor Edmondson says that when we're working remotely, which clearly most of us are doing right now during this pandemic, we lull ourselves into believing that if only we log into something, if we connect to Zoom or go to a webinar, or Microsoft Teams, or any other platform, somehow we're together, somehow we're connected. And the truth is that it takes a lot of work to engage a team and to work with a team and to be successful as a team. So it's not as easy as logging onto something, as many of you, I'm sure, have already figured out in the last few weeks. All right, so now I want to move on to talking about building trust and meaningful connections. Why trust? Why am I starting there? Well, that's because trust is the biggest single factor that's associated with contentment at work. If your staff members, if your colleagues in your nonprofit are content with their jobs and happy at work, the chances are they have a high degree of trust for their coworkers, for their peers, for their supervisors, for their subordinates. And when trust is lacking, you find much higher levels of disengagement and unhappiness in the workplace. So this is a really important issue, and I want to just delve into it a little bit further. Research on brain chemistry actually gives us a great explanation as to why trust is so important. So oxytocin is known as the hormone that promotes feelings of love, bonding, and well-being. And it's even been tested as an anti-anxiety drug. Oxytocin is secreted by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which is a pea-sized structure at the base of the brain. So trust, contentment, and productivity are inextricably linked. So let's jump into talking about ways to improve trust, to promote trust with your remote teams. So the first idea is to begin every check-in with a check-in. When you're sincere about asking these questions of everybody you're connecting with remotely, you're demonstrating caring, and caring about the members of your remote team inspires trust, right? And we saw how trust is so important to contentment and productivity. So these are 3 questions that I think are great for a check-in. And I would encourage you to ask this of everybody on the team, everybody on the call. And I know it's hard with a large group, but how are you doing? What do you need? How can I help you or support you? You know, put these down, jot these down, and remember to make sure you're asking these questions frequently. So my second suggestion is to continue with an icebreaker. Now, some of you are thinking, well, the remote team that I'm connecting to on a regular basis is a group that I already know, so we don't really need to break the ice. So if that's true, then I would encourage you to think of this as a warm-up, right? A warm-up. And it's important for even a familiar team to warm up. You know, when we're together in an office environment, we grab a cup of coffee together, we get settled in our chairs, we comment about the weather. So we do all sorts of things that kind of bring us together and get us comfortable to start talking about difficult issues. When we're working remotely, I think there's a tendency to jump straight into the agenda, and I want to encourage you to try an icebreaker. So I've listed some of the icebreaker questions that I like to use. The first 2 are questions we like to use in training. And what we found is that even when we're training a group of people who normally work together, so a management team, a leadership team, even a board team, these are questions that don't often come up. You know, what is my favorite film of all time? Or what's my #1 irrational phobia? And what we see happening when we ask this question, we go around the room and ask everybody to share the answer to one of these questions, is that people see connections and find connections. There have been so many times where 2 or 3 people in the same room named the same favorite film. And we've also seen instances where senior people revealed irrational phobias like fear of spiders, fear of snakes, fear of elevators, heights, and so forth. And but that second question, what it does is it shows some vulnerability, that even though I'm the CEO or I'm the CFO of an organization, I'm willing to say that, you know what, I'm afraid of spiders. And in most cases, someone else in that room or in that group or on that remote team will have the same fear. And it just creates this interesting connection. And it's a great way to start a session. Again, a warm up or an icebreaker. And then the last question that I listed, it's something that you're looking forward to in the next year. It's a question that I first heard as a warm-up at a board meeting, a wonderful board that I was on many years ago. And we started every board meeting with this question. And I have to admit, the first time, my first board meeting, I thought, wow, this is going to take a lot of time and we're going to waste time and we need to get to the agenda. But in the end, hearing everybody's hopes and aspirations and plans for the year and the things that we're excited about engendered so much trust and caring on that board that when it came time to actually talk about difficult things like a deficit or having to cut programs, we were such a caring and trusting group of people because we felt we knew each other. We knew that one member was expecting a grandchild to arrive any day now. Someone else was planning a trip to Europe next year. These simple questions just warm people up and help them get ready for difficult conversations. So I really encourage you to give these a try. Come up with your own, right? So the next tip is to show your team the big picture. One of the things I know from working with nonprofit teams across our sector, across the country and across the world, is that no matter what somebody's job is, they want to feel connected to the big picture. They want to feel like they're making a difference. No one comes to work at a nonprofit organization and says, you know what, I'm just here to do accounting and I don't care about the big picture. Everybody you talk to, no matter what their role is, no matter how close they are to your clients or your participants or your service recipients, everybody wants to feel like they are making a difference. And even if they're doing something relatively small, that there's a connection. And I think as leaders, we need to really make an effort to show our team members that connection. All right, so again, we rush to get into the tactics and the granular details of the meeting. We forget to make that connection. So I've just given you an example on this slide of one way to kind of tie the big picture to what we're trying to do today. In this example, this leader is reminding everybody that our #1 goal is to resume services to our elderly clients. The purpose of this meeting is to talk about XYZ. And then the leader says, but before we wind up, let's go back and figure out, is whatever we come up with, does it help us achieve that #1 goal? So in this way, it ties the kind of granular tactical work that the group is doing to the big picture. All right, so my next strategy is to go around and around. So it's interesting that one of the definitions of the term round robin is a tournament in which each competitor plays in turn against each other. One of the things that I found is that's very difficult in remote teams and in remote gatherings is finding ways to help people engage with one another. Oftentimes it's the leader, the facilitator, it's kind of a one-way conversation. It's more of a lecture versus a teaming exercise. And in other cases, certain people are quick to speak up and others are not. And as you all know, every one of your organizations is made up of both introverts and extroverts, and even some ambiverts, people that display both characteristics. The extroverts often come up with ideas as they're talking. So they talk as a way of generating ideas, whereas the introverts sit back and wait until they feel they have something really compelling to say. It's really important that you bring everybody out, because otherwise you're not really teaming, you're just having individual conversations. And I think you miss some of the potential impact. So I want to share with you one way to do this, to go around and around your remote team, whether you're on a telephone or you're doing a video conference. So I created this chart just to show you a technique that you can use and adapt in your organization. So this chart shows the names of the people that are on the call or on the video conference and the different topics we want to talk about across the top. Okay? And this could be as big or as small as it needs to be for your particular teaming exercise. But list all of the things you're going to talk about, are all the decisions you need to make, and also all the team members. And how I would use this chart is, as I approach topic 1, and I want to get everybody's ideas on topic 1, it reminds me to run through the list. In my case, it would be Catherine, Whitney, Kay, and Glenn. I want to make sure I hear from each and every person on my list. It could be a very long list. And before I move on to topic 2, now there are 2 ways to approach this in terms of order. Sometimes it seems like it makes sense to use the same order. So we go from topic 1 to topic 2, we run through everybody in the same order. The upside of doing it that way is that each person kind of knows when their turn is. So for those introverts, they're not caught off guard. The downside, though, is that you can fall into the trap of anchoring bias. So anchoring bias refers to a situation where when someone says something, the subsequent speakers just repeat or echo what's already been said. So in this example, Catherine says, here's the way to solve the problem. In my view, the best way to solve the problem is this. And then Whitney says, yeah, I think Catherine's idea is pretty good. And then Kay says, yeah, I think that'll work. And Glenn says, yeah, we might as well do that, right? That's anchoring bias, where you might not get the best idea, but you're kind of stuck with the first idea. So because of that bias, and if you worry that that bias might be true in your remote team, I would encourage you to switch up the order. So for topic 1, maybe you start with Catherine and run to Glenn, you know, Catherine, Whitney, Kay, Glenn. But for topic 2, you start with Kay, and then you go to Glenn, and then Catherine, and then Whitney. So you mix up the order. This kind of chart can be incredibly helpful. I was actually on a board where our board chair was brilliant at this. And there were board meetings where we had 35 or 40 people on the call. So we had staff, we had board members, we had consultants, and so forth. And this board chair was able to, first of all, he was able to recognize everybody's voice. So when people spoke, they didn't have to introduce themselves. He would say, well, thank you, Melanie, appreciate that comment. So he understood and recognized everybody's voices. But he was so good at saying, you know, Bob, Mary, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts? And I always imagined he was using a matrix like this, but I'm not sure that he was. He was just so good at at inspiring engagement. And at the end of the call, no matter what we were talking about and dealing with, I always felt like everybody had a chance to participate. And if I was feeling a bit shy about something, that he really encouraged me to participate. So I hope you'll try this tool of going around and tracking and seeing if you're really doing it by using a chart. And just by the way, with that chart, you can make those boxes super small and just use them to kind of tick off that, yes, you've heard from each member on each topic, or you could make the boxes bigger and actually jot down in the box what it is the person said. So you're keeping notes, or maybe you have one person taking notes and somebody else managing the conversation and making sure that we've heard from everybody. I think you'll find that at the end of meetings where you use this technique, that participants will feel so much more engaged and that their participation was valued. So I hope that that is helpful. Thank you. All right, so the next thing I wanted to raise is the importance of listening actively and effectively. And I want to start with these 3 A's of active listening. And you can find this information on the Lumen Learning website. And I've included a citation to this in a resources slide near the end of the presentation. Really, really important. And each of these 3 keys to active listening are things that I've struggled with during my career. So I just want to admit that straight up. This is something we all have to work on an ongoing basis. You don't just read it and say, I got that. You have to work on this throughout your career. All right, so the first one is attention. So the science tells us that we listen at 25% efficiency. And the reason for that is that our brains process information at 4 times the speed that somebody's speaking. So no matter how quickly I'm speaking, your brain is able to go at 4 times that speed. And so you tend to lose attention and veer off and think of other things, right? And it's why so many people believe they can multitask. They sign on to webinars and they try to do 4 or 5 things at a time, because intuitively they believe and understand that I could do more than just listen to this one person at a time. Unfortunately, the quality of listening declines when we're not actively listening, when we're not paying attention. The second A is attitude. And I know that many people, you know, traditionally you're asked to join a meeting, you're signed up for something, you're voluntold to do something. And some of us feel like this is going to be a waste of time. I'm going to be bored. I actually had a chance to participate in a 5-hour video call on Monday. And honestly, Sunday night, I was thinking 5 hours on a video call with about 20 people. As much as I love these people on the call, I was really dreading it. I thought it would be awful. It was amazing. We got a lot accomplished. It was fun and it flew by. We didn't even stop for lunch, and we got to 5 hours, and it was incredible. So I found that I was able to adjust my attitude. As soon as it started, I realized I got to push aside these negative feelings about 5 hours on a video call and keep a positive attitude. And it's so important to help you listen actively. And then the third one is adjustment. This is important because each of us needs to be flexible. Sometimes speakers kind of weave around things, or you probably have a colleague like this who is trying to make a point, but it takes them a long time to make the point. And some of us get very impatient. But I want to encourage you to think about this adjustment. Be flexible. Follow somebody down those detours, because there may be some interesting things along the way. And if you follow them along their detours, you'll wind up with some wonderful information at the end. If you get distracted and you stop listening actively, you've really robbed yourself of the opportunity to learn from that colleague. So I know it's hard, but I want to encourage you to do that. So 3 barriers to active listening. Just wanted to remind everybody. Anticipating. This is absolutely one that I'm guilty of time and time again, where I think I'm listening to somebody, but I'm really waiting to jump in and say something. I'm planning what I'm going to say. It's a huge problem. It means we're not actively listening. So just give yourself permission to encourage yourself, encourage members of your team to hold back on anticipating, to try not to do that, to kind of break that habit. Judging. This is another thing that many of us are guilty of. Judging somebody's content based on superficialities, their style of speaking, something they're doing that you find annoying or distracting. I'll give you another example. Years ago, I went to a workshop presented by an attorney, and it was about employment practices. It was a topic I was really interested in. Halfway through the workshop, he said something that really offended me. And I perceived it as kind of a sexist comment. And I was really annoyed. I had kind of an emotional reaction to it. But somehow in the moment, I was kind of self-aware, and I just convinced myself, you know what? This speaker, up to this point, has had some really good information. I bet there's good information to come. If I can just put aside that comment that he just made, I might be able to really get a lot out of the seminar. And it happened exactly that way. Now, I would never want to have coffee with this individual or work with them one-on-one or hire them to represent my organization, but I learned a lot. There was a lot of great content. I just had to put aside that judgment, that emotional reaction to something he said. So anyways, think about these barriers, remember these 3 A's of active listening, and encourage your team members, your members of your remote team, to reflect on these as well. All right, number 6 is to increase the frequency of check-in meetings, right? So while we're working remotely during this pandemic, we're all missing the human contact that we normally enjoy with our colleagues. We're getting a ton of human contact with our families, our children, and people who live under our roofs, but we're missing that contact with our colleagues. So I want you to commit to increasing the number of check-in meetings. We need to do more. So my team, we normally have a weekly staff meeting, but we see each other in the hallways all the time. We're trying to do daily check-in calls. Sometimes they're 30 minutes, sometimes it's 45, but we're just trying to do as many check-ins as we can possibly squeeze into our calendars. I also think it's important to have kind of a regular schedule to check in, but I hope you'll think about experimenting with teaming on the fly, right? Teamwork on the fly, really the meaning of that word teaming from Amy Edmonds' book. I want to encourage you to pick reasonably convenient times. Don't set up these calls for typical meal times, dinner time, breakfast time, and so forth. And let people have that personal space that they would normally have if they were living at home and coming to work instead of doing everything from home. I had a colleague recently who told me that while she's working at home, her boss would call her almost every day at like 9:02, like right after the 9 o'clock hour. And every day it was a different issue, but it wasn't a scheduled check-in call. But she said it made her feel like he didn't trust her, that he was checking to see that she was actually at her desk and working remotely. And it just engendered this feeling of mistrust and lack of caring. So really, I want you to avoid doing that kind of thing, doing anything, engaging in any behavior that sends a signal that you don't trust the colleagues that are working remotely. We need to have incredible levels of trust during this difficult time. And then the last thing I want to say about the frequency of check-in meetings is don't wait until everybody's available. One of the things that's been frustrating in the last few weeks has been trying to set up meetings and using, we use Doodle Poll, we might use other tools for checking out availability. And I'm on one board where every day we get a new Doodle Poll because nobody was, they didn't have enough people available and they had to redo the poll. That's really frustrating. Go ahead and have those meetings. Even though some people can't make it. And now there are times when you may have to have a board meeting where you can't take any official action because you don't have a quorum, but go ahead and continue with those meetings. People will attend, and sometimes you'll get some great ideas even though you don't have the majority of people in attendance. So somebody said during chat that my board is meeting more frequently. We used to meet once a month. We're meeting during dinner time. Maybe we need to adjust that. You know what, if you want to touch base with your board, and if everybody feels, or the majority feels it's okay to meet during dinner time, that it's not an imposition, that actually that is a good time, then you want to make those adjustments and do what's best for your organization. But just keep in mind that when a member of the family is at a meeting during dinner and everybody else is sitting down to have dinner, having family time, you really are kind of interjecting your organization into that those leaders' personal lives and may have some negative effects. All right, number 7 is prepare to problem solve. So, even before COVID-19, remote working was hard, and people who work remotely have struggled and felt mistrusted and vulnerable. right? Not knowing what people are saying about them, what their fate is with the organization. Are they treated as second class or third class citizens? And so this is now exacerbated that we have much larger numbers of people working remote. So I think it's important that you stay tuned into the potential problems and challenges that are associated with your remote teams and how people might be feeling. There may be some staff who are accustomed to being in the office, they're working remotely, and they're being required to use technical tools that they're not accustomed to. They don't like to use Zoom. They don't like to use video calls, and they're uncomfortable with technology. And all of a sudden now they're all by themselves instead of having somebody with better technical expertise sitting a few feet away. So just anticipate problems again. Make sure you're checking in with everybody to ask, how's it going? Do you need any help? Are you dealing with any problems that maybe I can assist you with? All right, so the last section of today's webinar is what I'm calling tips and takeaways related to how to keep your remote teams motivated, engaged, and focused. So a few more tips and ideas that I want to share. So I want to start with the idea of reframe and refresh. And Amy Edmondson in the book Teaming talks about these 4 practical tactics to reframe and refresh a team effort. And I want you to think about these, and ideas may not come to mind right this minute, but perhaps later today or another day this week they will. The first is to approach team projects with novelty and try to find ways to use this unusual set of circumstances that we're all in to test out a new approach and learn from that new approach. The second idea is to visualize your participation as critical to success. So imagine that, I've got to be part of this conversation or be on this team for this project, for this activity. Without me, it reduces the likelihood of success. So you have to put yourself right there. And then remember and remind yourself that teamwork really leads to better successes, more durable results than if we do things alone, even though many of us feel like if we do it alone, we can get it done faster. And then she says, internalize those prior affirmations as truth. I think it's the perfect time for novelty. We're dealing with a novel coronavirus, but there is an amazing opportunity for nonprofit organizations to be innovative and creative and try new things. But in order to do that, the first thing you have to do is identify things that you can stop doing. And this is a mistake that we often make. We continue to plan new programs and activities and just add to these huge lists of things that all of our organizations are trying to do. And we forget to carve back, to shutter, to scale back certain things. So the first thing is identify things that can be put on hold and put them on hold right away. Hit the pause button. And then ask members of your remote team to identify something that they've always wanted to do or that they hoped they'd be able to do that they've never had time to do under normal working conditions, and invite them to pursue that. I actually had a team member this morning reach out to me to say, I've been researching some professional development opportunities, and there's this online course that I would love to take, and I think it would help me. Would it be okay if I pursued that course now? And the answer is that's wonderful. What a great thing to pursue during this unusual time. So ask everybody to identify a new or novel project, and also encourage risk taking. And again, people are feeling really vulnerable right now, and so they may be less inclined to take risk. Here at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, we often use kind of criteria as we're trying to set personal goals or goals for our team. And one of the things I like to apply is this idea that, it's not a goal unless there's less than a 50% chance of success, that just doing what you've always been doing and doing what's easy and doing what you can accomplish, it's not really a goal, that's just work. So I encourage everybody to set a goal, at least one, that's hard. And so I also love goals where it requires that I learn something new. It takes me into unfamiliar territory. And I also love goals where it requires that I work with people I don't normally work with. So just some ideas about setting goals and coming up with some new projects. All right, so the next tip is to be gentle. At the beginning of our own board meeting last week, our board chair, Paul, his very first comments were, Hey everybody, just want you to know that please don't worry if the dog starts barking, if your kid starts crying, if your parent needs help, if the doorbell rings, that all of that's okay. And I think that some of those distractions or some of those things that are associated with working remotely, um, historically would annoy you, right? So I just would admit that personally, if I was talking to somebody working remotely and they were distracted by the doorbell and the laundry and family members, a few years ago, that would have really annoyed me. We've got to stop that. We need to be gentle. We need to just commit to being super gentle and understanding that this is the world that we're living in right now. And all of these distractions are probably more challenging to the person who's remote than they are to you who's trying to engage with that person. So be gentle. All right, next one is to keep your sense of humor handy. So I saw this is on Instagram, and there's an article about this. So there was a team that was meeting, and the leader of the team signed on, turned on video, and she appeared as a potato. And so her colleague said, my boss turned herself into a potato on Microsoft Teams and can't figure out how to turn that setting off. So she just stuck with the potato for the rest of the meeting. And there's an article about that, and the individual who was the potato, there's her face superimposed on the potato. She said, I usually try to do a camera. When we started the meeting, I saw myself as a potato. I was so confused. Why was I a potato? Of all the things I could be, why a potato? But you know what? She just went on with it. So there's going to be a lot of humor. We had a staff meeting the other day, and one of my staff members' daughter came running into the room and put her face right up to the camera, and it just gave us a chance to laugh and pause. And I think that's so important. All right, my next tip is to avoid being territorial. One of the things that always surprises me in nonprofit organizations is the degree that hierarchy in some cultures is so important. So you can't just reach out to somebody. You have to go up to your boss who's on the same level as that person. And there is so much territorialism and hierarchy and bureaucracy in nonprofit organizations. I think it shocks people who are new to the nonprofit sector that we actually have these things in nonprofit workplaces. What I want to encourage you to do is to find ways to break down those barriers, reduce that territorialism, and allow people to connect with colleagues that they need to connect with and they need to engage with and they need help from or need to provide help to without going through all those traditional steps in the bureaucracy. So if you're a leader in your organization, I encourage you to think about ways that you can break down some of those bureaucratic barriers that prevent people from reaching out to others for help or helping others who are not at the same level. All right, clarify commitments before closing. Remember, accountability is important. The word accountability means doing those things you promised to do. So before closing any sort of remote team meeting, go around and ask everybody to share their next step, ask for outstanding questions and concerns, and also invite those aha reflections and closing thoughts. I think that going around the remote room with just getting to hear from everybody, any sort of aha moments or closing thoughts or feelings they have is a way to end it on a really positive note, to end it on a light note. And in my experience, it's just worked really well. All right, so share tips on how to work from home successfully, use infographics. We just created this one a couple days ago with some simple tips, work from home tips. Do what you can to just remind people of some of the key things they should be thinking about. It's so easy to create an infographic like this that is really relevant to your organization. And everybody wants tips on how to do this better, right? How to be more effective. So my final thoughts, and then I want to run through some resources. The first is, I want you to think about how can I be more effective and generous in sharing information. So historically, many of us heard this idea that information is power. I think all of that has changed. I think in today's world, sharing information is powerful. Sharing information makes you powerful. And instead of giving people what we think they need, I want to encourage you to share information that you think people might want to know, right? So go bigger than what they need to what they might want to know. Make sure that you're asking, you're not assuming what people need or want. And then double down on patience and understanding. We need to be incredibly patient. My daughter reminds me from time to time that patience is at the root, or lack of patience is at the root of so many other problems we experience in life. And she's always saying, if you just be more patient, other things kind of fall into place. She's pretty wise for a young person. All right, so these are some of the resources, some of the articles that I've referenced during the presentation today. I encourage you to check those out. Really, really important. There's a brand new toolkit for building organizational resilience. It was funded by Duke Energy, produced by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I'm super proud that my team were the authors behind this toolkit. I think you'll find lots and lots of great information. You'll find it on the same page as the registration for this webinar series. So it's really easy to access. It's free of charge, and I hope you'll find great value in that toolkit. There are 3 upcoming webinars, and I'm excited to be presenting those coming up in April and May. So it's a series. I hope you'll share these programs. If you are a member of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, that means you're also a member of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. And you can access lots of member benefits from our team if you go to our website and use the affiliate member login. Super easy to do that. You'll set up an account, and then you'll have access to all of our Nonprofit Risk Management Center benefits. And you can see here we have newsletters, books, and so forth. So lots of great resources. We also offer the ability for you to ask any question related to risk. You can certainly give us a call, or you can fill out our risk help question, and we'll get back to you within 24 hours. And that's it. So I want to thank, again, Duke Energy for sponsoring the series of programs and the development of that toolkit. I want to thank the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits for planning and hosting this program. And I want to thank you for all your comments. Some of you have made some really interesting comments. And if you have questions, send them to me via email, give me a call, or if you've already posted the question in the chat box, then the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits send me that list and I'll respond individually. So thanks everybody. Thanks so much for being part of the program today. Be well and look forward to seeing you online at a future program.